everybody. Hi, welcome back to Lunch and Learn. I'm David Cowan of the museum. I'm the president, and I'm joined by board member Martha Goss over here. It's always best when you hear it from the horse's mouth, and that's exactly what's going to happen today when we hear from Norm Champ, who spent 5 years at the SEC in a variety of roles. At the end, he was director of the Division of Investment Management. He went to Princeton undergrad, then went to Harvard Law School. He teaches currently investment management law at Harvard. He spent 10 years at Chilton Investment Management as the chief counsel. He is now a partner at the law firm of Kirkland and Ellis. This book is direct and brings honesty to his public service at the SEC. You'll hear about successes, you're going to hear about some failures, and you're going to hear about an inside take on how Norm dealt with the entrenched bureaucracy, starting with a manila envelope, interoffice envelope that he received very early in his tenure that he'll probably share with you. Now, I didn't put this book down. I actually read it in one sitting. I was fascinated by it. If you choose to buy a copy afterwards, Norm would be happy to autograph it for you. I do have a warning label. You're going to shake your head in disbelief at some stages of this book with the entrenched bureaucracy. However, Norm is not a cynic about his time at the SEC, and I'm going to quote something from the book. He said that it strengthened, this is quote, strengthened his belief in the U.S. markets and financial system as an unprecedented engine for wealth creation for American citizens, end quote. And that's very much what this museum is about, and so we're very pleased to welcome to the stage Norm Champ.
Great, thanks so much for that kind introduction. Really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone for coming out today at lunchtime and sharing the chance to talk about the book. Looking forward to it. This is a number one in the sense that it's the first time we've actually had physical books for sale. So they literally arrived from the printer just in the last couple of days. So I had not seen an actual physical copy until today. So I'm definitely happy to be here and happy to see some actual real copies. So thought I would talk a little bit about, I think I have like a little outline here, talk a little bit about my background, talk a little bit about some of the things we saw at the SEC, and really I would break it into three pieces, kind of what we found and how we tried to change things there. Secondly, some of the policy battles that we went through at the commission during this time period. And then third, some of the thoughts I have about the future and how we can hopefully prevent the next crisis, but in particular ameliorate the effect of the next crisis on individuals, because we are going to have a next crisis. That is inevitable. And so I've got some ideas about how we might try to make that better and make people a little more able to bear the kinds of strains that come when we have a next crisis. So as was mentioned, currently in private practice, I am still teaching my class in investment management at Harvard Law School, which balancing that with a law practice is certainly difficult, but I do love teaching so much that I continue to do that. As was mentioned, I moved around the SEC a little bit, but primarily first 2.5 years in the exam division at the SEC, and I'll explain how that fits into the structure of the commission. And then the second 2.5 years as the director of the Division of Investment Management. Before that, I was in the hedge fund business. Before that, I was in private practice and also clerked for a judge. So starting out, first thing, just to try to get some orientation a little bit, Securities and Exchange Commission, independent agency of the United States. So very different, as I'll talk about, from other organs of the U.S. government. It is an independent agency, 4,000 people spread out in 12 offices around the United States. It has a three-part mission. You will often hear folks talk about one part of its mission, which is to protect investors, and certainly that is something that you're doing every day while you're there and trying to make sure that people are not harming investors and making sure investors have all the information they need to make investments appropriately. But there are two other critical missions, maintaining fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and the third piece is facilitating capital formation. So it is a three-part mission given by Congress to the SEC. Now, of the folks at the commission, only 5 are appointed by the President of the United States. And I'll get back to why that is extremely significant, particularly with some of the bureaucracy comments from the introduction. So there are 5 commissioners appointed by the president, one of whom is designated the chair of the SEC. So to the extent you see the SEC covered, it's typically around the chair and the chair testifying in Congress. And so our last chairs, we had Mary Jo White, before that Elise Walter, and before that Mary Shapiro. Those were the 3 chairs under President Obama. There are, by law, only 3 of the commissioners can be from the president's political party. So we have, typically, we'll have under this administration 3 Republican commissioners and 2 Democratic commissioners. And that's important to remember, because if you slim down now that there are 5 presidential appointees, 3 Republicans, the new president's going to get to appoint 2 commissioners, because there's 1 in existence, 1 still there, 1 Republican. So he gets to appoint 2. So at an agency of 4,000 people, he's going to get to appoint 2 people. One of the holdover people, their term expires next year. So in the end, he'll get 3 appointees to the SEC. Now, I want to contrast that with, anyone know how many people President Trump will get to appoint at the United States Treasury Department? No guesses? Besides the secretary, right? So I have 10. Any other bids? Not all, but so 350 people. So the top 350 jobs at the United States Treasury are presidential appointments. The important part about that is that when a new administration comes in, and President Obama and now President Trump, when you get to name the top 350 people at Treasury, you can move the Treasury Department, right? Because the people in charge, and there are some career folks, it's interesting, it's actually not strictly the top 350 jobs, because there are some career folks in those, but it is 350 total, so it goes down a little farther. But you can move the Treasury Department, right? So each administration has over 350 people of its folks in those jobs confirmed by the, appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. And so when it comes to policymaking, Treasury turns. By contrast, the SEC, with 3 Republican commissioners, you need a majority of the commissioners. So let's say we have a full complement of 5. 3 have to vote for any action. So even among 3 Republican commissioners, you often find they may not agree about something. In fact, Chair White, who was our last chair, was often voted with the 2 Republicans on certain issues. So it is truly an independent agency, right? It is not something where the president comes in and everything changes immediately. In addition, as we'll talk about a little bit, it's 4,000 employees, the vast majority of whom are career employees protected by civil service regime and by a union collective bargaining agreement. So the ability to move the SEC is far more limited than a lot of the other departments of the US government. Lastly, always like to emphasize to folks, so people have heard after each crisis, undoubtedly, things like Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley. You've heard of those laws that have come out of each crisis that we've had in the United States. The interesting thing there is that those laws that we keep passing after crises continue to amend the same 4 statutes that Congress passed, 1933, 1934, and 2 in 1940. We're still dealing with the same 4 statutes, despite hundreds, I was going to say dozens, but hundreds of amendments to them by statutes that have come along since then. The SEC is still reviewing disclosure under and enforcing and giving guidance on those same 4 statutes. Now, how are any of us doing? That the 40 Act, the newest of those, is 77 years, right? Yeah, 77 years old. And so the acts are showing their age. And so they don't, in general, in many spots, contemplate newfangled things like computers and email and stuff like that. And they still talk about ledgers and paper and record keeping. And even the Jobs Act that came out after, during the Obama administration, all of these amending the same 4 statutes. And so one of my former colleagues is here in the audience, and we used to struggle with the fact that the books and records rules and other rules under these statutes just don't capture a lot of these things we deal with today, like email, electronic messaging, all that stuff is just not thought about. So one of the things, I actually don't really get into this too much in the book because we're working on talking about a lot of other things, but we are probably due for a rewrite of the securities laws in this country to get them into the 21st century.